The first light of dawn had not yet broken when the F-5 Lightning rolled toward the end of the fog-covered runway. Its twin booms cut a sharp silhouette against the pale horizon, the silver skin of the aircraft catching faint glimmers from the lamps that lined the English airfield. The ground crew watched in silence. They always did when an F-5 took off. Other aircraft took off to fight. This one took off to disappear. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sat alone. No guns, no rockets, no armor plating. He carried nothing but a set of cameras, a fuel load calculated for hours of solitary flight, and a mission map marked only by coded symbols. The F-5 was a reconnaissance version of the P-38 Lightning, stripped of weapons and built for one purpose: capture the truth that the Allied commanders desperately needed. It was not a warrior. It was an eye in the sky. When the pilot pushed the throttles forward, the two Allison engines growled to life, the blades spinning into silver discs. The aircraft surged down the runway, lifted with a clean, effortless rise, and vanished into the low morning clouds with the quiet confidence of a creature born to hunt. By late 1943, the war had entered a phase that depended as much on knowledge as on firepower. Rumors spread across Allied intelligence offices about German secret weapons hidden along the Baltic coast. Peenemünde was whispered about in code rooms, briefing halls, and underground bunkers. Reports hinted at rockets capable of crossing the channel in minutes, far faster than any bomber. Ground spies failed to reach the facility. RAF reconnaissance flights had suffered heavy losses. Every failed attempt deepened the urgency. The Allied leadership understood something stark and simple. They could not destroy what they could not see. And so the task was given to the aircraft that could fly higher, faster, and farther than any reconnaissance machine before it, the F-5 Lightning. As the aircraft climbed through the upper cloud deck, the world opened into a vast sheet of pale blue. The twin booms sliced through thin ice crystals, the sunlight glinting across its wings. From a distance, it looked like a ghost, the kind that came and went before radar could track it. That was exactly why it was chosen. The F-5 could outrun most German fighters at altitude. It could reach 30,000 feet with ease. It could travel immense distances on its long wings, and without guns or ammunition, it carried only one burden: weight. The burden of proof. Inside the fuselage sat the true weapons of the aircraft, the K-17 and K-22 Camrys, each one the size of a small suitcase, each one capable of capturing astonishing detail from miles above the earth. Bridges, roads, airfields, factories, secret installations, patterns invisible to the naked eye. Shadows cast by structures the Germans tried to hide. The pilot checked the oxygen flow and began the long eastward flight toward the coast of occupied Europe. He knew the risks. If German fighters intercepted him, he had no way to shoot back. If flak burst around him, he had no armor to save him. If a camera jammed or a lens cracked from the cold, the entire mission would fail. Yet the pilots chosen for F-5 duty were not deterred. There was a certain pride in flying alone above an entire continent, knowing that every photograph could influence the decisions of generals and shape the outcome of the war. Far below, the English Channel stretched like a sheet of metal under the rising sun. The pilot crossed into enemy territory, glancing only once at the coastline where flak batteries waited for larger targets. The F-5 flew too high for them, too fast, too quiet. A silent hunter moving in thin air. This mission was destined for an unknown target. The pilot only knew that somewhere along the Baltic coast was a facility that Allied commanders feared above all else, a place where German scientists worked on rockets unlike anything the world had seen. Peenemünde. No guns, no protection, no escort. Just a camera and the courage to fly straight through enemy-controlled skies. As the F-5 crossed deeper into Europe, the pilot scanned for contrails. Me-109s often hunted lone scouts. FW-190s waited in formations above cloud layers. But the Lightning's speed kept it safe. Few German fighters could match its climb rate or endurance. He reached the target area just before the sun rose fully. The Baltic coast shimmered with mist. Below him lay the installation. Long shadows betrayed the shape of launch pads. Tracks marked the movement of large vehicles. Rectangular structures formed patterns that no Allied analyst had ever seen. He activated the cameras. The shutters clicked with the steady heartbeat of a machine capturing secrets the enemy believed were invisible. The pilot flew straight and level, not swerving, not dodging. The cameras required stability. In that moment, the F-5 became the most important aircraft in Europe. The images captured that morning would travel to photo labs in England, then to interpretation rooms where analysts would lean over stereoscopes and gasp at what they saw. The first undeniable proof of the V-2 program, the evidence Eisenhower needed to order Operation Hydra, the documents he later called the most important photos of the war. As the pilot turned back toward England, the engines humming with effortless rhythm, he allowed himself a breath of relief. The aircraft had done its job, and for the first time, Allied commanders had a clear view of the threat that loomed across the channel. The F-5 climbed higher, vanishing once again into the clouds. It was not a bomber. It was not a fighter. It was something more valuable. It was the spy in the sky, the unseen witness that would shape the future of the war long before the first soldiers stepped onto the beaches of Normandy.
The morning after the first successful reconnaissance run, Allied intelligence rushed the processed photos into the interpretation unit at RAF Peenemünde. Analysts bent over stereoscopes, breathing quietly, their eyes widening as they adjusted the overlapping frames. Long shadows, cylindrical shapes, rail lines that did not match any known aircraft or bomb stockpiles, a launch table, an assembly hall, a test stand pointing toward the Baltic Sea. It was the first clear confirmation that the Germans were constructing a new kind of weapon. A rocket. A terror bomb. Something faster than interception. Something no fighter could shoot down. But before Allied commanders could commit to a strike, they needed more proof. More angles, more detail, more images. And so the order was sent back to the same squadron. Another F-5 would return to Peenemünde, this time flying deeper, staying longer, and capturing everything the Germans hoped to hide. Before dawn, the pilot performed his ritual. He walked around the aircraft, touching each panel, each rivet line, listening to the soft ticking of cooling metal from the night. The F-5 seemed to breathe in the cold morning air, eager to launch again. The ground crew loaded fresh film into the K-22 cameras and wiped frost off the lenses with practiced hands. There was a quiet seriousness in the hangar. Everyone understood that the future defense of London might depend on what this single aircraft could bring home. The F-5 departed with a long, smooth takeoff and climbed toward the thinning atmosphere. The engines hummed with a perfect mechanical rhythm, their exhaust streams stretching behind like thin silver threads. The pilot leveled off above 30,000 feet, adjusting oxygen flow and checking the camera heaters. Below him lay a sleeping continent, shrouded in early morning haze. He crossed the Baltic coast near Rügen, where German radar crews monitored the skies for Allied bombers. But the F-5 presented a challenge to the Freya and Würzburg systems. Its thin profile and high altitude made it blend with the background clutter. German operators noted a faint trace on their screens, but it vanished before they could confirm it. As the pilot approached Peenemünde, the sun began to rise, revealing the sprawling complex in muted gold. From this height, the facility looked like a giant puzzle spread across the coastline. He could see the rocket assembly hall with its long roof. He saw the test stands with their blast marks. He saw cranes, storage buildings, and transport rails winding through the trees. He activated the cameras. Their shutters began clicking rhythmically. Every second captured another frame. Every frame carried information that could change the war. He held his course steady. That was the discipline of the F-5 pilot. No weaving, no evasive maneuvers. The cameras demanded precision, and precision meant vulnerability. He flew in a straight line while the coastline glittered beneath him, fully aware that German anti-aircraft batteries were waking up, scanning the skies. A formation of Me-109s scrambled from a nearby airfield. Their engines screamed as they climbed. The pilot saw faint specks rising below him. He checked his altimeter. The F-5 remained too high for the German fighters to intercept quickly. Their climb rate could not match the Lightning's advantage. Still, he increased throttle, using speed as his shield. He knew that if they caught him, he would have no guns, no armor, and no chance. The cameras kept working. The Me-109 struggled upward and began to fall behind. The pilot turned slightly west, keeping the complex in frame for the final shots. The shutter noise echoed in his headset like a mechanical heartbeat. When the film canisters finished their cycles, he exhaled deeply. The hardest part was done. He kept climbing, letting the cold, thin air wrap the aircraft in a blanket of silence. The Germans would not reach him now. The sky belonged to the F-5 again. On the return journey, he allowed himself a single glance at the coastline. He saw smoke rising from the testing area. He saw workers moving like ants. He saw the machinery of a weapon designed to terrorize cities. And he knew he had captured something vital, something few people in the world had ever seen clearly. Back in England, the developed photographs caused a shockwave. Analysts spread the frames across large tables, tracing shadows with pencils, measuring distances with rulers. They identified assembly halls, fueling stations, rocket stages, and concrete launch pits. The evidence was no longer theoretical. The V-2 was real. The photos reached Eisenhower and the combined chiefs of staff within hours. They were passed from hand to hand, the weight of their implications sinking into every face that studied them. These images confirmed not only the existence of the rocket program, but its scale, its readiness, and the urgency of stopping it. Within days, the RAF prepared Operation Hydra, a massive night raid targeting Peenemünde. The photos dictated everything. Routes, altitudes, aiming points, even deception tactics meant to confuse German radar. When the Lancaster bombers roared over the Baltic coast that night, they were guided by the vision of one aircraft. The silent hunter, the unarmed scout that risked everything to see what no one else could see. And when the bombs fell, they landed with devastating effect, destroying key facilities and delaying the V-2 program by months. A delay that meant lives saved in London, Antwerp, and every city within the rocket's reach. The F-5 did not drop a single bomb that night. It did not fire a single round. But it struck the first blow. Its photos were the trigger. Its courage was the weapon. And Peenemünde would never be the same again.
By early 1944, the war had entered a new phase, one defined not only by battles and bombers, but by illusions. Hitler and his high command know the Allies were preparing to return to Western Europe. They did not know where. Fear drove them to build defenses along the entire Atlantic Wall, but one place received more attention than any other: Pas-de-Calais. It was the closest point between England and France, the narrowest stretch of the Channel, the most logical place for an invasion. And Hitler was certain that the Allies would strike there. So certain that he poured concrete and steel into the region until it bristled with batteries, bunkers, radar stations, and artillery pieces. Yet the Germans went further. They built an entire false army group in the region: decoy vehicles, fake landing craft, wooden tanks, inflatable trucks, dummy fuel depots, everything carefully arranged to trick Allied reconnaissance. Photographs did not lie, the Germans believed, so they created sites worth photographing. But the deception was a two-sided game. The Allies wanted the Germans to believe Calais was the real target. Operation Fortitude South created fake radio traffic, fake unit insignias, and even a phantom army commanded by George Patton. Meanwhile, the real invasion force gathered silently in the south of England, preparing for Normandy. In this war of shadows, vision became the most powerful weapon, and the aircraft that carried that vision was the F-5 Lightning. Every day, under cloud cover or in bright winter sunlight, F-5s lifted from RAF Mount Farm and other reconnaissance bases. They followed strict routes toward Calais, flying at altitudes where German flak was blind and fighters struggled to intercept. Their mission was simple: to see the truth beneath the illusion. An illusion can fool ground observers, it can fool spies, it can fool rumor, but it cannot fool physics. That was the quiet advantage the F-5 exploited. From 30,000 feet, the Lightning's cameras recorded everything the Germans had constructed, but they also recorded everything the Germans could not perfectly fake. One morning in March 1944, an F-5 approached the coastline north of Boulogne. The pilot flew steady, adjusting trim, ensuring the cameras captured clean, overlapping frames. Below him lay rows of what appeared to be tank battalions camouflaged under nets, a convincing sight. But the pilot, trained to look for patterns, recognized something odd. No tire marks in the mud, no fuel stains, no movement, no tracks leading into forest edges, no heat distortions. He activated the cameras. The Germans had built tanks, but not the earth they sat on. A few days later, another F-5 flew over a supposed airfield near Pas-de-Calais. The photographs revealed dozens of fighter silhouettes, perfectly spaced, wings gleaming. Except the shadows fell wrong. Each shadow was too sharp, too uniform, and too long for the time of day. The aircraft were wooden replicas, their angles slightly off, their dimensions rigid. No maintenance crews, no refueling trucks, no dispersal stains around the bays. The analysts at Peenemünde compared the morning and evening photos. The fake shadows betrayed the trick. More missions exposed more deceptions. Inflatable trucks that sagged slightly under strong wind. Dummy landing craft that never changed position. Fake radio towers with no wires. Fuel tanks without supply roads. The Germans had created an impressive illusion, but every detail that did not match the physics of real military activity was captured frame by the F-5. The pilots understood that their photos could not only confirm deception, but shape strategy. If the Germans believed the Allies were fooled, they would keep their armor divisions in Calais even after the real invasion began. And Eisenhower needed those divisions frozen in place for at least 2 weeks after D-Day. The stakes could not have been higher. One F-5 mission in April revealed a critical weakness in the German deception. Near the village of Wissant, the Germans had constructed a series of bunkers intended to mimic fortified batteries. From ground level, they looked real. But from above, the F-5 photos showed that the roof vents were wrong. Real bunkers vent smoke or heat differently. These did not. The vents were painted shadows. Another mission caught a glimpse of supposed artillery positions, yet no shell craters surrounded them, no spent casings, no trenches. It was theater. The F-5 pilots laughed sometimes, not out of mockery, but in awe at the scale of the German effort. They were building an entire imaginary army, and the F-5 was stripping it bare. Still, the pilots never relaxed. German fighters stalked the Calais region aggressively. FW-90s lurked between cloud layers. Me-109s launched from Saint-Omer and Cambrai, climbing hard to intercept any high-flying aircraft. But the Lightning's climb rate kept it alive. Often a German fighter would reach firing range just as the F-5 nosed down into a shallow dive and vanished behind a cloud bank, slipping away with the speed that made it a legend. Back at Peenemünde, the analysts layered one set of photos on top of another, like translucent windows. They watched the deception unfold day by day. They traced the placement of decoy tanks. They documented the construction of dummy landing craft. They mapped the radio deception nets. And each discovery strengthened their conclusion. Pas-de-Calais was a trap. Normandy, quiet and underdefended by comparison, was the true opening in the Atlantic Wall. That conclusion would not have been possible without the F-5. Ground spies could not see it. Radio intelligence could not confirm it. Rumors proved unreliable. Only the eyes of the F-5, gliding above the coastlines in silent sweeps, revealed the truth.
In May 1944, the findings were sent to Eisenhower. The deception was working. The Germans were convinced. Panzer divisions remained at Calais. The F-5 had confirmed what the Allies hoped. The enemy was looking the wrong way, and Normandy awaited.
By the spring of 1944, the cold rain of England had become a familiar companion to the pilots of the F-5 Lightning squadrons. Every morning, they gathered in dim briefing rooms, listening to the rustle of paper maps and the quiet urgency in the voices of intelligence officers. Normandy. Its name appeared so often on the board that the pilots no longer asked why. They simply understood. Something enormous was coming, and their photographs would shape it. While the world believed the coastline of France was an impenetrable wall of German fortifications, the truth was far more complex. The Atlantic Wall was a patchwork of strong points, trenches, gun nests, minefields, and anti-tank obstacles. Some sectors were formidable, others were neglected, but the Allies could not afford guesses. They needed exact locations of every bunker, every gun, every obstacle, every road, every bluff, every stretch of sand. And the only way to obtain that information safely was from the sky. The F-5 Lightning became the primary instrument of that immense effort. From March to June of 1944, F-5s flew thousands of sorties along the French coast. They crossed the Channel alone, skimming clouds in the pale morning light. The pilots knew that every flight mattered. Every roll of film meant lives saved. Every image brought the invasion one step closer. The beaches of Normandy appeared gentle from altitude, curving bands of tan and white, calm water, cliffs rising from green fields. But the photographs told a different story. They revealed trap after trap. On Omaha Beach, the F-5s captured sharp patterns in the sand, rows of wooden stakes driven into the shore to impale landing craft. Inland, the photos showed layers of barbed wire, trenches, concrete bunkers dug deep into the bluffs, and machine gun nests positioned to sweep the sand with overlapping fields of fire. Along Utah Beach, the aircraft recorded obstacles hidden beneath shallow water. Check hedgehogs, log ramps braced with mines, scattered tank traps. The analysts at Peenemünde leaned over their stereoscopes for hours each day. They studied every shadow, every indentation in the earth, every angle of sunlight on concrete. They could identify the caliber of a gun by the length of its shadow, the thickness of its blast wall, or the smudge of firing marks around its firing slit. They extracted measurements from the frames with such precision that the invasion planners could map the coastline almost to the inch. Meanwhile, the F-5 pilots flew through constant danger. The Germans knew that Allied reconnaissance aircraft were gathering data. Radar crews tracked anything that strayed too close. Flak batteries hidden in fields fired blindly at distant contrails. FW-190s waited in between cloud layers, hoping to catch a lone lightning unaware. But the F-5 pilots used altitude and speed as their shield. At 30,000 feet, they were out of reach of most guns, and if a German fighter did appear, they relied on their engines, the same engines that had made the P-38 feared in every theater of the war. There were no guns to return fire, no armor to absorb hits, only the throttle and the courage to trust it. Some missions flew in dangerous weather. Low clouds, icy winds, and sudden turbulence threatened to shake the aircraft off course, but the cameras required stability. The pilots had to hold straight and level flight while the aircraft bucked against the wind. Their hands gripped the yoke as the cameras clicked steadily behind them, capturing the vital frames that would become the blueprint of the invasion. Back in England, engineers and planners used the photographs to build massive three-dimensional sand table models of the Normandy coastline. These models became tools for generals, naval officers, infantry commanders, and airborne planners.
Soldiers preparing for the invasion studied the images so carefully that some units could describe the shape of buildings and trenches on beaches they had never set foot on. The F-5 photographs also revealed the best drop zones for paratroopers and glider infantry. They identified hedgerows that could block movement, roads that could support tanks, bridges that needed to be seized, and areas likely to be flooded by the Germans. Every detail mattered, and the pilots knew it. One F-5 pilot wrote in his journal that he had flown over Normandy so many times he felt as if he could walk the beaches blindfolded. He learned the shape of each bluff, the curve of every inlet, the location of every German bunker. Yet he understood that his knowledge would never be used for himself. It would be used for the thousands who would storm those beaches in the first light of June. As June 6 approached, the tempo of missions increased. The weather grew worse, the tension rose, but still, the F-5s flew, under clouds, through rain, across the channel again and again, capturing more frames, confirming last-minute changes, ensuring no new gun or obstacle escaped notice. Then came the day when Eisenhower stood before his staff with the final intelligence summary. A thick binder filled with aerial photographs taken by the F-5 Lightning. Thousands of images, thousands of details, the entire coastline mapped with surgical precision. He placed a hand on the binder. "These," he said, "are the most important photos of the entire war." Because without them, D-Day would have been fought blind. When the invasion fleet finally crossed the channel under the cover of darkness and dawn, it did so armed not only with bravery and firepower, but with knowledge. Knowledge gathered by a handful of pilots flying unarmed aircraft through enemy skies to capture the truth. On June 6th, as landing craft crashed against the surf and paratroopers drifted through the night, the F-5 Lightning was nowhere to be seen. Its work had already been done. Its eyes had already shown the world what lay on those beaches. And the course of history changed because of it.
By the time the first waves of troops stormed ashore at Normandy, the pilots of the F-5 Lightning had already completed their part in the most complex invasion in history. They were not on the beaches with rifles. They were not on the ships with the naval guns. They were not in the sky above the armada guiding bombers into formation. Their contribution had ended before the battle even began, hidden in film canisters, sealed in envelopes, and projected in dim war rooms where decisions were made in silence. But their absence on D-Day did not diminish their role. In many ways, it magnified it. The soldiers who stepped off landing craft that morning did so with a map of the coastline already etched into their minds, a map born from the eyes of the F-5. Long after the battle, veterans recalled how uncanny it felt to walk onto a beach they had never seen yet recognized instantly. They knew the angle of the cliffs above Omaha. They expected the strong point at Versuville. They understood where the hedgerows thickened behind Utah. They knew where the German guns were hidden, not because scouts had told them, but because photographs had shown them. The true legacy of the F-5 Lightning was not a single mission or a single photograph. It was the understanding that information could be a weapon more powerful than any bomb. After D-Day, the F-5 continued its relentless work. It photographed every German retreat, every newly fortified position, every bridge still standing, every train yard still active. The war moved quickly then, a tide pushing deeper into France, toward Belgium, and ultimately toward Germany itself. And the F-5 moved with it, gliding above the smoke and rubble, always seeking what others could not see. Some missions flew into storms so severe that even bombers turned back. Others crossed flak belts so dense they looked like black curtains hanging in the sky. But the pilots pressed on, because they knew that without their images, the Allied advance would slow, artillery would miss targets, and entire divisions could walk blindly into danger. In the autumn of 1944,
The F-5 squadrons documented the German buildup in the Ardennes. Their photos revealed tank movements beneath the forest canopy, new supply lines, and fresh truck convoys hidden in valleys. These images later warned intelligence analysts, although the warning was tragically underestimated. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted, the F-5s were among the first aircraft to return to the skies, capturing the German counterattack in chilling detail. Through winter fog, snow, and bitter winds, they traced enemy movements during the battle, helping the Allies plan counterattacks and strike German supply points. Again, the Lightning flew without guns. Again, it relied on speed and altitude. Again, it delivered the truth that commanders desperately needed. As 1945 dawned and the war in Europe drew closer to its end, the F-5 Lightning continued soaring above the collapsing Reich. It photographed bridges destroyed by retreating armies, factories burning under bomber raids, columns of armor rushing toward the Rhine, and the shattered remains of cities like Cologne and Essen. And then came the final missions over Germany, where the Lightning documented the ruins of the Third Reich so that planners, historians, and governments could understand exactly how the war had been fought and where it needed to be rebuilt. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the F-5 pilots walked away quietly. They had no aerial victories to their names, no kill markings painted on the noses of their aircraft. Their machines carried no gunpowder scars. Their engines had not been fired in anger. Yet, generals spoke of them with reverence. They were the eyes of the Allied war effort, the only pilots who flew alone, unarmed, into the heart of enemy territory time after time, with nothing but trust in their engines and faith in their mission. Eisenhower never forgot what their photographs accomplished. He wrote later that the aerial reconnaissance program was indispensable, and that the images taken by the F-5 over Peenemünde and Normandy ranked among the most important intelligence assets of the war. Historians agreed. Without the F-5 Lightning, Operation Hydra would have lacked its target. Without Hydra, the V-2 program might have accelerated months ahead. London and Antwerp might have suffered far worse destruction. Without the F-5 Lightning, the deception at Pas-de-Calais might have fooled not only the Germans, but the Allies themselves. Without the F-5 Lightning, the planners of Overlord would have walked into Normandy with far less certainty. And without the F-5 Lightning, the Atlantic Wall might have remained an enigma, a deadly puzzle waiting to consume the first soldiers who stepped onto the beaches. That is why the aircraft earned its final nickname among those who understood its true value. The sky's ghost, a silent presence, unseen by the enemy, undefended, unafraid, returning each time with the most precious cargo of the war, not bombs, not bullets, but knowledge. Knowledge that saved lives, knowledge that won battles, knowledge that changed the war itself. When the last F-5 was retired, long after the final guns fell quiet, its legacy remained etched not in museums or monuments, but in every page of history shaped by its photographs. For the F-5 Lightning did not simply fly above the war, it revealed it. And because it revealed it, the Allies could end it.